Just like the first game, Boons are back in Hades 2. Gifts from the various Greek gods to help Melinoe bust her father out of time jail and give her a chance to stand up to the big bad of Hades 2, Chronos. With the game in early access, there's a chance we're going to get even more boosts to Melinoe's firepower than we've already got, but after spending some time with the game in its base form, we've put together a list for the best boons you can currently get in Hades 2 from every god we've met along the way so far. From elemental nukes that can clear entire rooms to HP boosts that'll keep you alive in the stickiest of situations, let's get into them. I'm going to kick things off with a special mention to the two gods who provide probably the best range of boons in Hades 2 right now in early access. Boons that can be applied to pretty much any build or any weapon you want and still be viable picks. A brand new boon giver in the form of Festus, and the goddess who got the biggest glow up from the first game, Demeter. If you've managed to play Hades 2 so far, you'll know that the later rooms in the roguelike are absolutely stacked with mobs. The enemy density can get a little bit wild at times, and the fact is, freezing all your enemies in place for easy sweeps is an absolute godsend, literally. Demeter might have been one to avoid in the first Hades, but she has multiple boons in Hades 2 that can elevate any build to a winning run. Two boons in particular combo especially well when you're all about making your enemies frosty. Arctic Ring freezes any enemies caught in your cast, making those aforementioned late game mobs way easier to deal with, and putting it together with Cold Storage keeps them frozen longer, anywhere from 2 to 5 seconds depending on the rarity you manage to get. You can also use Gale Force as a passive to add a Cyclone to your cast to really lean into the magic, or adding Ice Strike or Ice Flourish to add freeze and damage to your attack or special respectively is a surefire way to keep those late game rooms from getting too overwhelming. And Demeter even adds a very nice defensive option in Winter Coat. It reduces your total magic meter, which can be a pain if you're focusing on that for your build, so it's not necessarily for everyone, but it grants you a barrier that absorbs 1 hit of damage in every encounter. A free hit in every room you go into is a great boon no matter how you swing it. But if you prefer hot to cold, then can I recommend a new addition to our cast of Greek gods? Hephaestus, the Olympian god of craftsmanship and the forge. Hephaestus's power mainly comes down to just how hard the new blast mechanic hits, and since the dev team have recently suggested big balance changes won't be landing in Hades 2 anytime soon, it looks like that'll stay that way for a while. Volcanic Strike and Volcanic Flourish add the effect to your attack or special respectively, and it can swing for 200-ish damage, resetting after a few seconds to be applied again. And if you upgrade the boon with Palms of Power, you can whack the cooldown right down so you blast all over any encounter you face. Molten Touch is a great late game addition to your boon, since depending on its rarity, it increases the amount of damage you do to armor up to 50%, and by the time you're getting to the Fields of Mourning, pretty much every enemy has armor, so it's pretty useful. And Mint Condition gives you 8 seconds at the start of any encounter when you're invulnerable to damage, meaning if you're quick, you can clear initial mobs with little to no threat to your good self. He's also got some of the best duo boons you can grab in the game right now, and while it's not necessarily the most powerful, I'm a particular fan of his duo with Aphrodite, Soft Caress, which heals Melinoe for the damage she would have taken from the first instance of damage in every encounter. Free heals and some massive boosts to your vitality if it's a boss fight. But these are only 2 of the gods you can meet in Hades 2, so now I've gone through their highlights, let's take a look at the rest quickfire in alphabetical order, just to keep things simple. Aphrodite's boons haven't changed all that much from Hades 1, but there are still some good additions to her arsenal. Rapture Ring adds a pull effect and a weak debuff to your cast, which works very nicely with Flutter Strike to deal more damage to close range enemies. Just make sure you're using the Sister Blades or Moonstone Axe to take full advantage of cozying up to your enemies. Healthy Rebound, on the other hand, works with any build and is one of my favourite boons in the game. At its base, common rarity, clearing a room with 80% of your health fully heals you. Combining this with an Arcana card like the Wayward Sun, which heals you a little bit after every room, is quite an easy way to keep your HP up and stop those pesky deaths happening too often. Apollo is one of the new gods added to our helpful list of relatives, and there are a few ways he can give some big boosts to your kit, even if we are taking a bit of time to warm up to it. Combining Lucid Gain, which gives you passive mana regen while you're standing in your cast's area of effect, Supernova, which makes your cast's area of effect grow bigger and bigger while the effect is ongoing, and Solar Ring, which doles out a ridiculous amount of damage when your Omega cast expires, lends itself greatly to a magic-focused run, allowing you to spam Omega casts without really worrying about where your mana is coming from. And it's also great for crowd control, which I will keep saying is massive for the late game. Artemis works a little differently now in Hades 2 in that she's a random encounter rather than a doorway sigil you can pick. But she's not really changed from the first game. That aside, pressure points and support fire are still solid picks for any build, just like they've always been. The other of our random helpers, Chaos, offers a little more in the way of variety, but with the associated negative debuff ruining your next few encounters. The Will Blessing is probably the best to take. It gives you constant mana regen per second, so if you're running with Apollo's boons in tandem, you'll basically never run out of mana. And obviously Defiance, which grants a +1 death defiance to the run, should basically be an auto pick unless you're confident you're never gonna die, but that's a rare pop-up indeed. Hermes also hasn't changed much since the first game. He's all about increasing your speed and making you harder to hit. Nitro Boost is probably his best option, boosting your sprint speed and giving you a one-hit barrier at the start of every encounter that we admired so much in Demeter's kit earlier. Hera is another new addition to our boon givers, and her abilities are a little tricky to wrap your head around at first, useful as they can be. They rely on the new Hitch effect, which allows you to push damage onto enemies afflicted by the effect when you deal direct damage to other enemies. Pretty handy when you're facing those huge swells of mobs in the later levels. As a result, Sworn Strike and Sworn Flourish are decent picks across all weapon types, allowing you to spread your damage nice and evenly across the pack, and Hereditary Bane makes the effect last longer and bite even harder with increased damage. Brave Face automatically uses magic to resist up to 50% of any damage, which makes it a great boon to combine with an Apollo build, since you'll almost always be regenning your mana. And Bridal Glow is a great Hail Mary boon to take if you're approaching the end of your run, or a boss fight that you think might be about to end your run anyway. It makes all boons become heroic rarity, but they lose their rarity every 5 encounters, so you won't last long when it starts to really crack down. Moving on, we have another new goddess, Hestia. Her abilities all focus on the Scorch damage over time effect, and it can stack fast. Soot Sprint destroys ranged projectiles and scorches enemies that shot at you, while Smolder Ring traps enemies caught in your cast and deals Scorch damage over time. Another great way to crowd control your way to the later levels, since you can trap a handful of enemies in your cast and basically ignore them while they burn to death. We still need a bit of time to experiment with her kit a little more to get the measure of it, but so far, we're quite impressed by the heat Hestia deals out. Next, we have Poseidon, and he's had a bit of an inadvertent nerf in Hades 2. His knockback isn't really that great, since some of the best ways to deal with enemies is to group them together and freeze them or blow them into smithereens. And his combat boosts only really work situationally or in tandem with others. Wave Flourish is good on range builds, since it can buy you some time if mobs get too close, and Hydraulic Might works really well with Hephaestus's mint condition because it boosts all your damage in the first 10 seconds of an encounter, but on the whole, at least for me, he's one to avoid right now. Seline is Moon Incarnate, another new addition, and her boons are more like the Call ultimate abilities Zagreus could call upon in the first game, except they're triggered when you use a certain amount of mana in an encounter. All her abilities are kind of situational. Moonwater is probably the most applicable to all builds, since it restores 25 HP and resets whenever you drink from a fountain, but I am partial to a good Moon Nuke, and Total Eclipse blasts a target area for 1000 damage after 4 seconds of it triggering. But it requires the use of 200 magic to trigger it anyway, so it's a boss button, if nothing else. Zeus, much like his brother Poseidon, is a bit washed in Hades 2, at least as it stands. He literally has a duo boon with Hera that bins off all of your Zeus boons and increases the level of boons that you have from Hera. That's how bad he is. It mainly comes down to how his shock effects trigger now. Unlike the original game, most of them are on a bit of a delay. And ultimately, Blast and Freeze are just better. Maybe he's just having an off day. His once estranged and now reconciled brother has been kidnapped by the embodiment of time after all. Speaking of, I've saved the last spot for Hades himself. Yes, everyone's favourite misunderstood Father of the Year is in the game and only appears towards the tail end of your run when you finally get to Tartarus. And while he does scold you for trying to go after Chronos, he mainly helps you by weakening your final Chronos encounter in some way. Deep Descent means Chronos will summon fewer reinforcements, which can be very useful, and Unseen Ire means that after you take damage you can vanish for 10 seconds and strike to reappear and deal 100% bonus damage, with a cooldown of 40 seconds just so you can't spam it. But after that, with all the boons you've collected on the way, it's all down to you and the big bad of Hades 2, Chronos. Best of luck. So there you go, the best boons you can find in Hades 2, at least chosen by us anyway. Let us know if we've missed your favourite down in the comments, and while you're here with us, YouTube has selected the perfect video just for you to watch next, so why not check that out right here.